Do you really need a 4x4 in Iceland in winter? That's one of the most important questions that you need to ask yourself before your trip. In my 10 years of living here, I've seen people stuck in storms, sliding off icy roads, missing flights, or even having to be rescued because they picked the wrong car. The car you choose basically determines whether your trip is safe or whether you'll be white-knuckling the wheel for hours. And in this video, I'll help you figure out exactly which car you actually need. It really comes down to three things: your driving experience, where you are going, and your budget. Let's start with the most important one, your experience. Here you need to ask yourself, have you ever driven in real winter conditions before? And I don't mean just a light city snow or a bit of slush. I mean proper ice, snowstorms, zero visibility, and strong side winds that can literally push your car sideways. If the answer is no, then honestly don't even think about it and rent a 4x4. Every single year I see people on the road absolutely scared or confused and just holding the wheel tight and driving through what locals would just consider, a light winter storm. And I don't blame them, driving here in a storm is genuinely scary if you are not used to it, and that's often nowhere near the worst conditions that Iceland can throw at you. Iceland is absolutely not the place to learn winter driving for the first time, trust me. If you do have a real winter driving experience, then yeah, you might be able to get away with two-wheel drive. And to be fair, if you stick to areas like Reykjavik, the Golden Circle, or maybe just a short south coast trip and the weather behaves, then sure, you'll be probably fine. And by the way, if you are already looking at the rental options, then I'll put discount link to the companies I personally recommend down in the description. But now, here's the reality most people don't understand. Experience doesn't really matter when the weather completely flips on you. If you get caught in a snowstorm with 30 mph winds and ice under your wheels, you are in for a very scary experience. And that's exactly where a 4x4 stops being a luxury and becomes a common sense. Also, where you are planning to drive matters more than anything else. The moment you start talking about the Westfjords, North Iceland, or the Eastfjords, that's a completely different story. Those regions get often hammered with heavy snowstorms. Also, what you will encounter basically all around Iceland are these long stretches of coastal roads with no barriers protecting you from a steep drop into the ocean, or mountain passes which often have these steep sections and tight turns. And these are just a few examples of situations where you'll definitely not feel comfortable driving a two-wheel drive. And here's the part that nobody warns you about. Even if you stick to the areas that usually get less snow, you can still leave Reykjavik on the drive pavement and then end up on the road fully covered in ice an hour later. And also what happens here quite often is that when the snow gets packed on the road by cars and then it melts, basically the entire road turns into like a very slippery ice skating rink. And the thing is that outside of Reykjavik and certain areas, Iceland doesn't really put salt on the roads. And sure, when things get bad, they often spread some gravel on the road, but a lot of the time you are still just driving on a clear ice. And that can be very sketchy even in a four-wheel drive. In a two-wheel drive vehicle, it's not really worth the risk. And so, and I'm saying that locals only drive 4x4s here. No, many locals have two-wheel drive as their daily driver. But you have to remember, there's a difference between a local who is used to driving here daily and knows every single section of the road, and a tourist who's got no idea what lies ahead. Alright, now let's talk about the cars themselves, because not all 4x4s are equal. Just because a car is labeled as a 4x4, it doesn't automatically make it a good choice. If it has a low clearance, you'll still struggle the moment you hit a deep snow or an unpaved parking area. And that's why clearance matters just as much as traction in many situations. Something like a Land Cruiser, Hilux, or I don't know, Defender, or anything with bigger tires and more height basically gives you way more control and far less chance of getting stuck somewhere stupid. Unfortunately though, these are also the most expensive options, and I'm not saying that everyone necessarily needs this. The roads that stay open have usually pretty good winter service, and those that close become completely impossible unless you have a modified truck on like 38+-inch tires, which is the car that you cannot really rent here anyway. And that's why the best value for most travelers is something in the middle, like a Dacia Duster or Toyota RAV4. But basically I would just say avoid the low clearance 4x4 options like Tesla for example, and you also don't need the big trucks unless your budget allows it, you want extra comfort, safety and peace of mind, or you simply want something that looks great in your photos. Which, let's be honest, something like this or this is definitely sexier than many other smaller cars. But listen, I understand that renting a car in Iceland is still very expensive. especially if you are traveling alone and you cannot really split the cost. And so if you finish watching this video and you are still not convinced that you should rent a 4x4, here's what I would say. if you are mainly staying just in Reykjavik, doing a short trips and you're not planning to venture too far north from the capital, then yes, a two-wheel drive can be fine, especially if you genuinely know how to drive in winter. In that case, what I would consider is to rent a two-wheel drive first and then watch the road and weather conditions closely before you arrive. And if it looks sketchy or you have any doubts, just upgrade to 4x4. But of course, make sure to check with your rental company in advance if they even allow it. And just a quick reminder, no matter what car you rent, you are not invincible. Before you drive anywhere, check the conditions every evening and every morning. Yes, twice a day, the weather changes fast here. Use road.is for road conditions and closures and weather.is for weather, especially wind. If you see wind above 20 meters per second or more, start thinking carefully about whether it's actually worth driving or how soon you should arrive to your destination before the worst part of the weather hits. And here is also something people only think about once it's too late: insurance. At minimum, make sure that you have sand and ash insurance, which basically protects you in situations where heavy winds throw gravel straight into the windows or damage paint on the car. Then you should also consider windshield protection, because cracked windshields are quite common here and are pretty expensive to fix. And then there is a door damage insurance, and that one catches tourists constantly here. The wind here can literally rip the door out of your hands, and it happens here all the time. To avoid that, always park facing the wind and always hold the door with your both hands when you open it. And yeah, overall just make sure that you know exactly what's covered in your insurance before you drive. But that's not what this video is about, and so let's bring everything together and answer this question directly. Do you really need a 4x4 in Iceland in winter? If you are visiting at any time from the end of September to the end of April, just rent a 4x4. And yes, exactly, that includes the shoulder seasons too. Trust me, I've seen some crazy snowstorms even in early May, so better safe than sorry. And same thing applies if you have no winter driving experience, if you are going north, east or west, if you get stressed driving in the bad weather, or simply if you want a peace of mind. On the other hand, if you are truly only doing short, easy drives around Reykjavik and you know how to actually drive on snow and ice, then two-wheel drive can work. But honestly, the price difference in winter isn't always that crazy. Just think about the fact that by traveling here in winter, you are still spending about half of what summer trip in Iceland would normally cost you. And so in my opinion, the difference in price is basically nothing compared to the stress and the risk running into bad weather or sketchy conditions. And remember, the discount codes at the description will also help you save a bit of money, so make sure to check it out. But I also need to say, in the end, it basically doesn't matter which car you rent if you build your itinerary wrong and you let your trip completely fall apart. And so make sure you watch this video next, where I break down some of the biggest planning mistakes and how to actually avoid them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you there.